Hey guys, welcome to Conscious Conversations. My name's Luke McLean. It's been a little while since the last episode, but for good reason. Um, you know, since Noah, which was an amazing episode, so much has happened. In my life personally, and my decision to leave the Cotton On Group, which is a business that I'd worked as a a wellness and mindfulness coach, to to start a little studio myself and to live a little bit simpler, a little bit more authentic, has sort of come about and manifested, which has been amazing. But that sort of led me to really dive in and focus on the rebuild of my website and really getting clear on the offering. And I just thought it wasn't. I had some great episodes, already recorded, but I wanted the right website. I wanted the right offerings to go with the podcast, and directing you to the podcast with a half-built website wasn't a good look. So I sort of paused the podcast or the episodes that I already had recorded and decided to really get that up and running. But now we're good to go. So that's really cool. The website or the business is Kinfolk Wellness Studio. So kinfolkwellnessstudio.com. And Kinfolk Wellness Studio really is a bit of a manifestation of everything that I love about life. So within the studio, there'll be physical training classes, movement classes, personal training, which I've done for over 10 years now. And for the past year, I've really stepped back from training people, but realized how much I loved it. And as much as it won't be the full-time part of Kinfolk, it will be a part and a key part of me working with people in that in that physical well-being space. But Kinfolk will also offer meditation classes and workshops, which I'm really looking forward to. I've got some really good contacts out to get some yoga classes happening within the studio, and I'll also be offering my coaching as an offering through the studio. So my life coaching, my leadership coaching, and my mindfulness coaching, which is really the same thing, but just on different areas that are focuses and passions of mine of working with people to really step into their authentic self and live with more purpose and fulfillment, which is just what I'm so passionate about. So that's really what Kinfolk's going to be. It's sort of a culmination of 10 years worth of personal development to be a personal trainer at the start, to move into a life coach, and now as a meditation teacher. And I'm really going to bring these three areas of my life together to create Kinfolk. So really looking forward to that. So that's enough about the studio, but this podcast now, and that'll also free me up a little bit more time, which I'm really excited to put a lot more energy into conscious conversations, which again I really love. So today I've got a really beautiful episode and a really thought-provoking episode with Katie Traill. Katie Traill's got this really cool workshop offering on the surf coast near Geelong, called Seed Blog. And she just helps people to live a little simpler, to live, a little more organically, if you like. And we talk a lot about everything from being plant-based and vegan to sustainability and what's next in the future after Corona. So it's a really broad discussion. It's a fun discussion. I love that we don't really know each other, Katie and I, that well, but we were bouncing off each other, which was really nice in this conversation because we're so aligned with our values, which made it a lot easier. So without further ado, this is Katie Traill. This is Conscious Conversations. It's good to be back. My name's Luke McLean, and here we go. Were you aware of the amount of plastic, like subconsciously, or did that all of a sudden, just when that got into your awareness of the impact plastic had, and then you just saw, like, imagine in a hospital the enormity of plastic being used and disposable plastic,
Mm.
like, was that like an overnight thing when you watch something and then the next day realize the impact that's having, or did that gradually start to weigh on you as you spent more time at the hospital?
I've thought about this before and I can't remember. There might have been a specific time where I had watched something. And to be honest, I think No, it was even before. So the War on Waste, the ABC's War on Waste, came out
Yep.
not long afterwards. But I actually think it was about 12 months before that aired. So I can't think of what it was. And I think it probably was a bit gradual as I just started generally learning about human detrimental impact on the environment, and waste was such an in your face thing. You can think about big problems like ocean pollution and deforestation, but it's not in visually in your face all day every
Yeah.
day. And perhaps it was just that waste was, and it was in my consciousness because I could see it all the time, and it was just part of what I was learning. And I wonder whether, because at this probably at the same time I was getting back into my yoga practice more intentionally, and I was rediscovering meditation practice, and I'm sure that that all has a bit of a conjoined effect over time as to what you become aware of, and what you don't, which I'm sure you know much better than I do. But yeah, I don't know, it was a gradual
Mm.
thing, I think, and then once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. And how, like, I think you bring up a really interesting point that, and I'm, most people that I know and myself personally, like when you go, it doesn't really matter for me what path you go down, whether it's meditation or whether it's like, as you said, like gardening and studying the principles of permaculture or whatever it
Mm.
is, a lot of other things open up. Like, so you could, talk to people that are avid market gardeners and, that they've discovered meditation or yoga, or they're eating
Mm.
more plant based, or someone that's plant based all of a sudden that had no real interest in starting a veggie garden or composting starts to want to do that. And then, a yoga or a wellness activity comes into their sphere. Like I'd love to know with you, and especially with who you hang out with, that sphere of awareness that starts to really open up and expand.
Oh, totally, totally, totally. And the big two at the start for me was going plant based, and I literally went to from a meat eater to a vegan diet overnight. Um,
Wow.
Literally, I was just so blown away by what I learned, and I probably did have a niggly feeling in the back of my mind somewhere that it just didn't, something wasn't right. And we all learn about factory farming at school, but a lot of us don't put two and two together until we're a bit older, or ever. And that was huge. That came in the same time as the plastic and the just generally waste, and realizing that recycling is so not the be all and end all, and how it's run, especially in Australia, is so inefficient. And then that progressed onto, yeah, like I was saying, yoga and meditation. I actually came into yoga and meditation more from a different tangent. It initially had nothing to do with being more aware or being more environmentally conscious. It was about managing my mental and physical health and chronic pain issues. And but it like you said, it goes hand in hand. And at the time, you may or may not know of one of my favorite people in the world, Meg. She's a great friend of mine, Meg Odgers, and she had been vegan for I think at least 2 or 3 years when we met. We met through the footy club. Our partners played footy together, and she became, within those first few weeks of I think 2016, was a mentor for me through transitioning to plant based emotionally. Physically was
Yeah.
so easy for me, I'm sure you guys can probably relate to it can be, not for everyone, but it can be much easier to actually physically stop buying meat and eggs and dairy, and choose whole foods and choose organically grown fruit and veg. But to emotionally process that, and then to deal with the emotional setbacks from conversations with family and friends, was a whole nother ball game. And so
Yeah.
she really helped me through that, because it was quite a traumatic process in a couple of instances. And she's also a yoga instructor, and now is a qualified psychologist. At the time, she was at university. So she came at it from this beautiful, thoughtful, trauma aware position, where she could actually hold space for me and see this little baby vegan growing
Yeah. Yeah.
growing
For
into
sure.
that, learning these things. And she could see herself in what she experienced years ago. And I think that was actually so helpful, not necessarily didn't have to be about veganism or plant-based. It could have been about anything, but having someone there, like you said, having the people around you, and it wasn't just Meg, it was lots of people, but she was definitely the start, was just so freeing, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I know for sure that and I can still remember when we went. I think we went vegan. Maybe we sort of went plant based. Maybe 2000, late 2012,
Yep. Yep.
and it was and really interesting in terms of especially being a male, and I'd been at the football clubs and done those things, but um, having to go to those barbecues and that first Christmas with my family, and to go, oh, actually we're not eating any meat or any cheese or dairy, and just they weren't being rude, but just not knowing what to say or not knowing what to do, and just the awkwardness of the whole day because our kids weren't going to eat a sausage or a steak, which now I reflect on it is just weird that creates any awkwardness, but that's just how it was sort of, nearly 8 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be really threatening to other people's views about health, environment, their own diet. It's such a challenging opinion for so many people. And it really was from my immediate family, not for my partner at all. He didn't even bat an eyelash. He was fine, and now actually doesn't even eat meat himself. He's just doesn't like it anymore, and that's great. But I really came up against a few almost aggressive, definitely aggressive retaliation sort of in conversation. And even though I was trying quite hard to not be dogmatic, because it is really difficult, and it'd be really interesting if you're someone listening and you maybe had a conversation with a vegan, but you've never actually tried this yourself. It can be really difficult not to want to shout from the mountaintops what you've discovered when you learn the atrocities in factory farming and all those sorts of things. Can you relate, Luke, that you
Oh, for sure. It's for me, and exactly, Katie, I'm, really responsive to that because, and my kids grow up and knowing that, I remember Lily got asked about, one of her friends asked her at school why she doesn't eat meat, because all our kids, our 5 are all vegan, and, I think it's Ziggy and Maple have never had anything, and I think Bonnie might have had some cheese and dairy. But anyway, yeah, and someone asked Lily at school, like, why you don't eat meat, and her response was, A, it's not good for your health because she watched some documentaries. B, it's not good for the planet.
Yep.
And C, she said, I don't like, being responsible for killing animals. Like, so her 3 tiers, which are the 3 most common reasons, like, are pretty. And I don't, if people want to eat meat, they can eat meat. That's like, I don't preach it, but there's 3 quite significant factors now behind making a choice to eat less meat or to go plant-based around A, your health, B, the environment, and C, ethical with how, animals are raised. And it is hard to argue with that, but also people, I think because it is so hard to argue, people that are really stuck on meat and, maybe are invested in farming of meat or whatever become quite, quite not reluctant and not wanting to hear because it's such a strong argument these days.
Yeah, it's a very strong argument, and for whatever reason, and I know there's people who've written lots of amazing books on these, Peter Singer and the likes, but it is so confronting to a lot of people. And I guess where I was coming from with that is I try really hard not to be dogmatic. And I think in the early days, potentially it just came out a little bit. I was very emotional about what I'd learned and wanted people to know about, the deforestation associated with farming cattle and blah, 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 and all the carbon released into the atmosphere and methane and all these sorts of things, because environment was really the one that converted me straight away. But I've learned that just, it's no surprise, but leading by example and being actually quite humble is always the best way to educate people, whether it's veganism or anything else. And to the point where a couple of our best friends, we love going to their place for dinner when we're allowed out of the house every couple of weeks. And they both come from beef farming families, and they're both friends who will often, once or twice a month, or dad killed a cow and filled up the freezer, and we've got heaps of steak and things, and that's how they live. But I never once said, I'm not okay with that. And now we go over to their place for dinner, and they make me a vegan dinner, and we all have a vegan or vegetarian dinner together once every 2 weeks. And I just love that because there's never been any conflict between it, or never any argument or conflicting discussion, and B, it's a vegetarian meal that they potentially would never have if we didn't go over there once a fortnight, and that actually to me is like a beautiful way of them reducing their carbon footprint once every fortnight. So little things like that I think can potentially be big wins. I really like that.
Yeah, and I don't think, Katie, that you're gonna get people to create sustained change and want to change by guilting them into it. Like if you try to
No,
make them feel
yeah,
bad about it and really overexpose them unwillingly, people don't like that in any case. Like no one likes to be forced.
yeah,
But if I think if what you said is really important, if you lead by example, if you hold that tension between making people really known that these are your values, this is what you do, and not trying to hide it either. But what I've found, and I'd imagine you'd be the same, that people then come along a lot more curious as to ask a lot more questions, knowing that you're not going to preach
yeah,
it to them, but they're going to want to
yeah.
know, okay, so Luke, would you, what tofu recipes have you got, or what would you do with this, or, what milks do you use instead, or what are you doing to get your protein? And they're
Mhm.
curious questions that then you can start a conversation with without trying to tell, but it's a connection, not an attachment.
Absolutely, yeah, spot on.
So I think what I'd love to talk to you, Katie, is also, today about how you feel things are going with the coronavirus. And something that's sort of coming to my awareness
Mm,
is that there's been a bit of, a forced increase in plastic use now because of this coronavirus,
yeah,
plastic gloves and all this, and you can't get your coffee in a reusable cup for whatever reason, that it's going to be more contagious or whatever, that all of a sudden this people that had created a lot more shifts and changes in their behaviors now are going back to old behaviors because they're feeling that plastic's a safer option.
yeah. Yeah, I've really noticed it and saw it coming really early. And I think there's no one right answer to it, or a solution. I think part of it is just going to be awareness during, and then once we're past the brunt of this, really bringing back that education again to
Yeah.
people remember. But I think my gut feeling during this is that there is such a we've had the rug pulled out from under us. A lot of people, I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of us have really felt shaken by this. Whether it's people, like me, who have lost a job during this, or people who have, gone through the stress, like having 5 kids at home, homeschooling, like you were just talking about, or um, really, really intense life shakeups. And I really think that has a big, deep impact on the human psyche, and our stress levels, and therefore our consciousness, and our uh, open mindedness as well. And I think potentially that, at least at the moment, I think is such a priority, is the mental health of us as a community and as a wider population. That if it means that someone has to order their dinner in takeaway containers to support themselves, to support their family, to support the small businesses that are trying their hardest to stay open, and sacrifice some plastic and some packaging in that. Maybe if that is going to have a positive impact on how they mentally and consciously come through this event, maybe it's worth it. I
Yeah.
think you could argue it too, but I think if we all come out of this really stressed and guilted and trying to do the right thing for the virus, for our health, for the environment, and so much pressure on everyone, pressure and stress is just like a boiling pot for who knows what. And I think if we can come out of this in a better mental state, then the flow on effect will be more positive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think there's conflicting values. There's so many conflicting values and
Yeah.
conflicting beliefs on the virus, the impact the virus is, having, but also the impact, as you said, on at a mental health level that it's having on people, at an environmental level, and even governments sort of that were under pressure environmentally. Again, this virus has eased some of those discussions and some of those narratives because again people's awareness has been shifted off the
Yes.
environment and onto
Yeah.
the virus. So and not by choice, but that's just the means to the end at the moment. But I think how we get on the other side of this, and what I think we really need to do is create a really strong narrative and a strong campaign towards living, with minimal impact, zero,
Mm,
getting towards zero waste. Once this starts to subside a little bit, that people don't start to feel like they can go outside, but the coffee cups and the plastic bags and the gloves continue 12, 15 months beyond
mm,
what they need to.
mm,
And we just accept that we have to have gloves and that we can't have reusable coffee cups, and that at shopping you're going to use plastic bags again because of the virus, but the virus is actually gone. That's the bit for me
mm.
that we need a big campaign to get back on the environmental wagon, so to speak, as a country.
I agree absolutely, and I'm sort of mentally preparing myself these last few weeks to do that. Through towards Zero Waste Geelong, when Meg and I are able to run our
Mm.
workshops again. We were meant to have them in April and May and cancelled them because of the virus, and we will be running them again later in the year, August, September, I think. But we're really ready to take that approach that you've described. And I think we really need to at least partially leverage it off the fact that a lot of people are realizing how much they value the outdoors and the ocean and time at the beach and time in the forest, because that we're also deprived of it at the moment. And I think we need to hold on to that and remind people not to forget how much you are craving that experience right now, and how you would feel if that was lost, not because of the virus, but because of our treatment of the environment.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that you're thinking that way as a narrative, because I think it's a nice selling point to people to realize how much they appreciated the walk along the
Mm,
beach and the trees, and heading out to the Otways or to wherever to really take that in.
mm,
Mm. So that's good. What do you think, Katie, around do you feel like people have been exposed or really susceptible in this pandemic that they call, around not having the food sovereignty and not having the vegetable gardens and not having the again, the local community um, to provide the food, and we're so reliant on the supermarkets and that supply chain and that bigger company connection, that we don't have we need more community living from this, that we need to not rely, so we don't need to rely on China or other countries as much.
yeah. This has been so interesting to watch, hasn't it? The nurseries selling out of seedlings and seed companies having to pause orders for 6 months because they're overwhelmed, and all these, and the supermarkets are out of flour and things. It's so interesting. And I think a lot of people who are very involved in the industry, and especially um, farmers and wholesalers, were probably saw this coming quite easily. I know friends of mine have, but I sort of didn't. I guess I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't think it would be so intense. And it really reminds me of when I was studying my permaculture design certificate in 2017. I was up in Nimbin in New South Wales and having the time of my life for 2 weeks. And one of the subjects was, I can't remember the title, but it was about environmental catastrophe and managing things like bushfire, flood, natural disaster that would cut off major food
Mm.
chains in particular, and was educating us on community independence and food chain supply locally. And I remember thinking at the time, this is mad. Why are we learning these Armageddon like tactics to survive these situations? It's 2017. This isn't going to happen for another 50 to 80 years by the looks of climate change. And how wrong was I? Because 2 years later, we hit, the bushfires hit, and it was just people who were educated in permaculture and similar um, tactics, I guess, and planning were the ones that just came out the best. And they said, I told you so. This is what we need to prepare for. And now I'm going, right, we actually really need to get our A into G and really look at local, hyper local community independence and like you said, especially about food sovereignty and food security, which I'm learning are definitely two different things.
Yeah.
And I think I remember saying when the virus hit that my brain went up in value on the stock market because I have so much gardening knowledge, and I thought, geez, this is such a good, really good hobby or business to have, and I think it's so important that we do learn. And if it takes a crisis for people to actually prick their ears up and say, hey, I need to know more about this, then that's just how it is. And I think humans are great like that. We're usually the frog in the pot of boiling water, and it really takes a big shake up if we are to wake up as a collective. And unfortunately, it's taken something as serious as this virus for people to start learning this, but we do need to perpetuate it. I'm sure you probably think the same, is that once we sort of go back to whatever a version of normal is, it really needs to stay in the forefront of people's mind. And that's going to be something that I really focus on with my business and my social media presence, is to keep that in the forefront of people's minds, saying, actually, hey, I know a lot about these skills. I think they're really important. You can come and learn from me. You can ask me questions. I want to learn from you. I want to connect with my community more, because you can see how bloody important that is.
Yeah. No, exactly. I think you summed it up perfectly. We need to continue the conversation around this, because the reality is that this might not be an isolated incident, that this could be the
Yeah.
start of a continuation of things that happen across the globe. And you throw into that global warming and things that will start to happen in that space, that this was the one that come from left field for me a little bit, where people were like, their bushfires were in people's sphere of awareness, or floods, and that could have an impact on food and the need for community. But a virus, I don't think many people were seeing on the horizon as the next thing after the bushfires to really hit hard. And that's the bit that I think people realize, is it's not just the global warming, climate change conversation. That there's a lot more happening in the planet at the moment that can really throw a spanner in the works a little bit. So we do need to become more resilient as communities and as people that can live, more sustainably to ourselves and to each other and share. So yeah, I'm with you, Katie. And I think if we can round up, a good following of people that want to learn that way and want to live that way and get a community, and there's another couple thousand of those communities right around Australia and the world, then that starts to become the shift and the change that we need. It's community and area by area. It's not, no one's going to come and say, Now, this is the blueprint for how you're going to do community living, and it's going to involve meditation, yoga, permaculture, and just follow this and everyone will do it. It's going to be by community by community.
Oh, totally. I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I know a lot of people, especially in sort of the permisphere, there's a huge belief that if we all just bought a block of land and started a commune, the narrative of, oh, we'll all just grow, we'll have this huge farm and everyone will build their own houses and every neighbor will help each other, and it'll all be a beautiful little community. We'll cap it at 500 people. We'll live there for the rest of our days and it'll just be peaceful and beautiful. And unfortunately, it doesn't often happen like that, if ever particularly successfully. And I've learned of quite a few examples where that has been, this utopia has been the goal. And then you learn that personalities and decision making and hierarchies really can get in the way of that. So the diversity is always going to be key. Like you said, each community will be really, really different. And I mean, our region, where I live in Jan Juc, is really different to where you live in Birregurra. And that would dictate if, what food we might grow, or, the soil type that's here, and the access that we have between certain other farms or bigger places like Geelong and Melbourne. And that's really important. And catchment areas and access to, the ocean versus inland bodies of water and rainfall, all these sorts of things are so variable in locations. And it's actually the stuff that is so bloody important if we're looking at long-term survival and not even survival, success and thriving. And I know my partner and I have talked about fairly recently where we might want to live for the long term, and climate has been such a big factor in that. And, where is going to be the most resistant place to live for us, given the impacts of climate change? Because if we choose to have a family in the next couple of years, that's going to have a huge impact on them and even us when we're older people. So thinking about those sorts of things are, without making it sound a bit scary or intense.
No, I think it's great, because I think I'd love to know, because we do the same. And I think most people that have got a view of that, of a real longer term view and a view of living closer to nature and simpler. I'd love to know how you and your partner, what are some of the questions and what are some of the factors that are coming into that conversation when you start to think about a long-term living, ideal, especially when you take family into account? Like, what are some of those conversations looking and sounding like, Katie?
Good question. I think there's so many factors. You could almost categorize it into sort of environmental, long-term climate emergency factors, and then personal factors, and then factors relating to, Australia as far as our politics and laws are concerned. But I guess we talk about things like rainfall is a really big one, because fresh water is our most precious resource and it is reducing. And without using so much energy in this salinity, I've just forgotten the name of them. the plants where you can process salt water into fresh water and things. They use so much energy, and it's not a sustainable solution. We really need to have better ways of accessing and catching fresh water. So that's a big thing. And so when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about Tasmania. I'm thinking about coastal regions. Where you guys live as well. The Otways, Apollo Bay. I'm thinking seasons as well, and the extremes in seasons, which doesn't always relate to the specific area where you are, because climate change is changing that so much, and what's true for now isn't necessarily going to be true in 30 years. But less intense summers and less intense droughts. I grew up in northeast Victoria, lived through droughts for decades, compared to really intense frost and snow, or even really dry winters. We're lucky to have a wetter winter this year, but previously we've had many, many, many dry winters, and that changes throughout the range. And then other things like a livelihood. We have to think about what we're going to do for the long term. And James works in construction and has plans on eventually going down the sustainable building pathway and looking at prefab homes and ethical sourcing of materials and things. And I'm working in the area of healthcare, which will always exist. Where we're always going to need healthcare. It might morph into a different picture, but it's always going to be an option there. And then I also have, this whole other branch of my life, which is gardening, permaculture. I really have an interest in regenerative agriculture too, and would love one day down the track to actually manage an orchard and have some veggie garden there as well. But for that, I'm thinking about soil type, and climate, and to have something like an orchard, potentially I need to live somewhere that has really cold winters, like in northeast Vic and in certain parts of Tassie, because that's the best place for stone fruit to grow. And I'm not going to do that in the north coast of New South Wales. So I guess there's so many different questions. It doesn't really simplify it for anyone listening, but there's so many people to talk to and resources to read. And we're so lucky to have the internet and lots of great books like Retro Suburbia from David Holmgren, and that really look into future proofing and making do with what you have. If you can't just up and move somewhere, we rent, so we don't actually own a property, so we do have the flexibility to move and things, but not everyone is in that situation. So that's sort of what goes through my head.
Yeah. No, and I ask because I'd imagine a lot of the listeners, and when we do, regularly have those conversations about, are we happy here? But also when you start to, again, go on this journey, where you live and your community, I think comes up in conversation a lot more. And definitely, I think most people that I've in, probably our areas and our circles, not that we're in the same circle, but, Tassie always gets a mention, obviously, because of its simplicity, and it feels probably a bit more disconnected and it's been less contaminated for now. And seems to have a bit of a movement of, especially around Signet Way, a bit of a movement of simplicity, and almost like an earlier version of Byron Bay with a bit, without the tourists, seems to be what's happening around Signet. So that's obviously always in people's minds. But again, you've got, I think, coming back to where you live right now and doing what you can do within the community that you live right now, rather than sort of, again, what you said before, is trying to escape to this utopia that might not never exist. And you sort of live in this middle ground of not really accepting the moment, but also not making the change. And I always think when you're not accepting and you're not changing, you're really discontent. So people, I think for people, and what I'd love to discuss in this final part is, how can people start to make those small steps that you mentioned in the first place, in terms of little changes to their garden, to their lifestyle? How can they, reduce a little bit more plastic within how they live right now?
I love that. And I think in answering that, I want to highlight too that you don't need to look at the objective and structural all the time. I know you interviewed Jade Miles, and she talks about sense of place. And community is part of that, and actually feeling like connected to where you are is so important. So it is, I think that the emotional side is definitely valid. It's not just moving here because it makes sense. And in that, making changes, starting small. I mean, you've heard it many times before, but starting small is so important. And this is what Meg and I teach in all our workshops is pick one or two small things, and maybe they make objective sense to you, or maybe they actually just feel really good to do, and make them a habit. And once you've got a habit, and I use the example of, if you're really new to this sort of approach, things like literally taking your keep cup or using a coffee plunger instead of the disposable filters might be your daily ritual. That's really easy for you to incorporate. And after a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, once it becomes automatic, move on to the next thing. Tick, that's great. That's a habit. You don't have to think about it. It's automated. What's the next easiest thing for you to do? Maybe it's to keep your reusable bags in the front seat of your car where you can actually see them. So you, even though they're in the car, you actually remember to take them into the shops. And then even maybe taking the next step once that is a habit of, okay, well, let's connect the dots. So I'm shopping and reducing my packaging and I'm buying it perhaps from the supermarket. Why am I shopping at the supermarket? And what's the difference between here and grocers? And hang on, am I able to access local food? Maybe I don't even have to go to the supermarket. Maybe I can get local veggie box delivered that's actually grown within, a 50-kilometer radius of where I live. And that actually has this really beautiful unseen benefit of keeping money in the economy, in your local economy, supporting people who you may even know or be friends with, and reducing food miles, which reduces so much fuel and carbon emissions and refrigeration. It's such a small change, but can have such a really, really big impact. And that might be one thing that you do for a few weeks and then you add to that. So picking little things that you feel are easy, that make you feel good, that makes sense to you as well. And if you actually don't even know what those sorts of things are, then that's where you start conversations with people, whether it's, messaging myself on Instagram or talking to your parents or your neighbor and, where did you buy your produce bags from? Where do you shop so that you can actually buy your almonds and cashews without plastic bags? And opening up conversations, I think that's so important. They're probably my main ones.
And do you even take it back do you chunk it back even a little bit simpler where, working with people to allocate 45 or 20 minutes a night instead of just scrolling your socials, but spend a good amount of time each week researching local co-ops or, follow 20 people that are doing sustainable stuff in your area, like that, even taking that first step further in terms of, what are the environments and connections in your area that could raise more awareness, to, again, follow you and then start to, spend some time each week reading your blog, again, because I think that continuing the practice of bringing it into our awareness of thinking that way through what we read, what we consume, again, makes those practices of your shopping bags and your cups a lot easier rather than if you go to the shop and it's a 500-meter walk, you'll actually walk back to your car to get the bags, not just go, I'll just use plastic this time. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, I think Meg talks about this a lot. It's really about human psychology and what we find, following the path of least resistance. And then I think for it to be ingrained like that and for people to have those penny drop moments where they value the action so much or the outcome so much that they will walk back to their car, like you said, is to understand the why. And then, maybe that is spending that time researching once a week. I think really social media can be a really positive tool. It gets a lot of shit, but I learn so much through what people share on Instagram and Facebook and things like that, on blogs. And maybe it's just starting with following five people on your Instagram feed who you find inspiring in this sort of world, and whether it's someone who is growing veggies in their backyard, and you can find literally hundreds of thousands of people sharing all about that, or whether it's a bigger page like Take Three for the Sea, Tim Silverwood and the crew who encourage to pick up rubbish, and maybe that's what you do because you live by the beach and it's easy for you to do something that is meaningful, that relates to your situation or your environment. You can see the why behind it. Oh, I'm actually going to reduce my plastic because I hate going for a surf on a Saturday morning and I get a plastic bag in my face when I'm trying to catch a wave. That's a really obvious connection, but that would, for a lot of people, make the penny drop. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
And even
there's no easy way. Is what I'm trying to say though. There's no black and white. Oh, just do this and you'll remember.
yeah,
It's a little
and
bit of digging.
what we do at home, Katie, especially with the kids, is sometimes what we'll do is have a real focus over a month. So the month might be around ocean pollution, and and really use that month to look at some different sites, or to start to create a conversation with the kids around less plastic. And then the next month it might be around gardening, and trying to do more in the garden with them, of planting and looking at seeds and stuff. And it's not so much that we write it on the list, but it's just a natural sort of flow of taking the kids, especially on the journey of raising the awareness in different areas of your life. And what we've found, or what especially I've found with the kids, is once they start to know about it too, they ask questions and they want to know more, and it just builds the energy within the house, instead of trying to keep it separate, as if mum and dad are trying to do it but the kids aren't on the ride. The kids actually help me, especially, hold me accountable to what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that comes back down to conversation, to being open about it, doesn't it? To actually be open to whether it's suggesting something or even just mentioning something. Again, not being dogmatic. If this is you trying to encourage your housemates or your partner or whatever, opening that conversation and talking about stuff that might sound a little bit greeny or might be a little bit taboo to talk about meat consumption, but it really takes take the bigness away from it, take the emotion out of it, and just go, okay, I'm just going to really sit down and look at how much plastic we buy in our weekly supermarket shop or whatever. And maybe that, talking with your kids is the first step. I love that. I love how much they take that on, and they know that you're so open about it, that they are non-judgmental, that they can ask those questions, and you're going to give them great, educated, conscious responses, because that's the relationship that you have. And if
Yeah.
people can cultivate that in their friendship groups and things, and that's beautiful. You're not going to get chastised for mentioning to your friend that maybe they should get a keep cup. That trust is important.
Yeah. And the kids are actors. Like they take action. Like Cooper, our oldest, I remember we were at Aries and there was rubbish and he was behind us, and next thing you know, he's got a handful of rubbish that he's walking with, because of a conversation we'd had weeks ago. But he'd remembered that conversation around beach pollution, and just automatically, I'm going to pick it up, and that's what I really loved, is the kids are much more, rather than philosophy or concept, they actually put that into action if they know, and it's into their awareness and understanding.
And it just makes sense to them, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And hopefully that they, have friends in their circles, and that next generation, it just becomes normal. It doesn't become I'm doing something good for the environment, and it's not about, spiritual materialism of look how good I'm being and look at the change that I'm making, but this is just how we need to live. It's not, there's no ego involved. There's no, separation between. This is just how it has to be. And that's what I think we need to really look for in that next generation, that becomes more of the normal than the non-normal, to be eating processed foods, to be buying plastics, to be, polluting and doing things that are poor for the ocean. That'll start to become the abnormal, and the normal is, care for the planet.
That's exactly right. Creating your own normal and what intuitively feels like the right thing to do. Yeah, that's what it's about for sure. That'll make the change.
Yeah, I think so, and I really do hope so. Katie, where can before we go, where can people check you out? I know you've got Towards Zero Waste Geelong with Meg. I know you've got the Seed blog. Like, how can they get involved with what you're doing? Have you got an online course? Is that this weekend with? Was that
I do.
last weekend? With
Yeah, no. So my online course is still open. I've got a couple of spots left, and it actually doesn't start till the 16th of May. So that is a gardening online edible gardening 101. It's called the Crash Course, and it's literally the fundamental information that you need to know about soil, elements, plants, and applying to your yard to how to set up or revamp an edible garden. Yeah, so that's going to be so much fun. It runs for 4 weeks, starts in 2. And that and any other information about me, including my blog, is just all on my website, which is cblog.info. There's plenty of bits and bobs up there. There's a few YouTube videos now that I'm popping up to give people a bit more free access to gardening information, seeing as there's so many people getting into that at the moment. And then on my social media, lots of different stuff about low impact bits and bobs.
And can we give? I think we should give a shout out to is it the Good Food Project that's happening?
The Good Meal Project.
Good Meal Project.
Yeah, which is Little Green Corner. So that's Hugh Whitehead and his crew.
Yep.
Joel and Jono. They're so I also work for Little Green Corner too. That's right. And that at the moment, as a takeaway business during COVID, they're actually setting up catering. So they're doing deliveries of meals, and you can either subscribe for 4 meals at a time, or you can do what I've done a couple of times, which is really fantastic, is gift a meal to someone else so they can drop it at their doorstep and give them 6 meals and a lovely homegrown crumble or a chocolate and coffee baked cheesecake or whatever is going for the week. That's a fantastic initiative.
Yeah, no, we're definitely on with you. We're going to try and get a meal from him at some stage soon when I'm in Geelong. And there's in the Pipeworks, there was some work that you were doing with those guys, with Hugh and Little Green Corner, on workshops for corporates, which I think, again, we might touch base with later. But as companies start to come back to work and start to connect again, I really do believe that team building and team connection is going to be one of the first things that culture is going to have to start again. Because, the reality is that you might have had a team of working remotely away for 8, 10, 12 weeks, and that important time to connect collectively is going to be one of the first steps. So that's something else that the Little Green Corner works on. What's that program that you're doing with them, Katie?
That's right, and that's called Connections by LGC. So hopefully we can get that up and running again. We just started, and we had our first couple, and then the virus hit. So like many other businesses, we'll just have to wait and see.
Perfect. Katie, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. It was nice to have a nice discussion in this time around, living simpler, living more connected, and, the need for community. So I really appreciate it. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Luke. Have a good one. Cheers.